today, and I want to extend my thank you for attending this webinar. I think it's a good one. I don't get to talk about group policy that much anymore, but when I do, it's very exciting. Hopefully I have some really good information to provide for you today as we go through 5 myths of group policy. Some logistics for today's webinar. This is being recorded, so in the next couple of days you should be receiving an email with a link to the recording. Please keep an eye out for that. That way you can review any information if you missed something, if you want to go back. You can also share it with other people. We'd love for you to share that information. If you do have any questions, we do have a team working with me today that you won't hear, but certainly they'll be answering your questions for you as you go through. So if you do have any questions, please use your GoToWebinar panel, and there should be a question area, and you can send the questions to there, and someone will be answering them as we go through. So you don't have to wait to the end. You can actually ask the questions as we go through. If for some reason there's any questions that you have afterwards, you can, of course, email the AD Solutions events team, or right there is my email. Please email me, and we'd be more than happy to get back to you. I can say without a doubt that we on the AD Solutions team, with questions, it's a way for us to learn. It's also a way for us to hopefully solve some of your problems as we go through. So hopefully, if you do have any questions, you will reach out to us and you won't be shy. Some more logistics, some information about me. My name is Derek Melber, and I am an Active Directory MVP. I've been an MVP now, I think 16 times, maybe 16 or 17, I don't really know. It's hard to keep count. But I've been both a group policy MVP and I've been an Active Directory MVP. All of us on the call obviously know that group policy is an integral part of Active Directory, and it's a key aspect. So thus, one of the reasons we're actually having this webinar. One of my latest books, I've written 16 books. One of my latest books is actually the Resource Kit, the Group Policy Resource Kit from Microsoft Press. Some of you may actually have this on your desk. I appreciate it if you do. The book is actually still relevant. Microsoft hasn't written a new book since this book, so it's been, oh my gosh, 10 years now that Microsoft hasn't produced a book on group policy, and it's everything that I know, they won't actually produce another book on group policy. Group policy really hasn't changed that much, even though we still struggle with it a little bit. So that's a resource that you have available. I do want to talk about some other resources that we have available. We don't have a ton of time today together, so I want to leave you with some things that you can go to. If you actually go to our main landing page, manageengine.com, let me point you to some free resources that I think are very good for you. If you go to support and then go to directory, you should be able to find the latest and greatest information about Active Directory that we've written. I try to blog every week. I just got back from a 32-day trip, so I probably missed some of the information as I went through. But you can see here that there's some information about group membership. We try to talk about Azure. We try to talk about Office 365, user management, group management, privileged access. We try to talk about a lot of different things here. So please come take a look. As you see here, most of the blogs are less than 5 minutes of your time. So please come take a look, and you should get some good information here to help you out on a weekly basis. Another resource that I want to point you to is if you come to our main landing page again, go back to the main landing page, hover over products, and in the lower left-hand corner, we have this security hardening site. Now, this particular security hardening site was built about 2 years ago, but it has some amazing information when you want to secure your Active Directory domain controllers and your Windows servers. And if you go to the bottom of this page, you'll actually see that there is a breakdown of key security areas in Active Directory. And if you click on any one of these, you'll see that there are blogs broken out. Some of these are actually videos too, of us basically breaking down the steps on how to secure that particular area within, again, your domain controllers, your Windows servers, and within Active Directory. So this is an excellent resource. This site is literally about 15 years of my experience working with admins, security professionals, and auditors, and I put everything in one place so that you have one place to go. Very powerful. Another resource I want to point you to, throughout our website, you'll see that we have this new Securing Privileged Access and Active Directory book. It's a very kind of a fun read, but really good information in here, some good tips. All you have to do is click here, download it for free. You can share it with people. It's just a great way to kind of learn a little bit about privileged access and how to secure that privileged access and Active Directory. So again, this might be a resource that you want to share with someone else in your organization. So those are some different resources that are available to you. Of course, my email is a final resource I want to point you to. And then I also want to talk a little bit about the 2017 World Tour and, of course, the 2018 World Tour. You can see some of the places that I just went to in the Sweden, Poland, Israel, Italy, Denmark. I was in some amazing places, talking with some amazing people. Very, very, very fruitful in terms of meeting administrators and helping organizations. And that's really what we do in this World Tour. I know that in 2018, we already have some ideas on what we're going to do for presentations, and we will be hitting the same areas that we normally hit. I think this year we went to about 8 different cities in the United States, and I think we went to about 20 different countries, if not more. So in 2018, we'll be continuing our World Tour for the 4th year. Very, very powerful, very engaging. If you haven't been to one of these, please keep an eye out in your email and come join us when we're in a city near you. So let's jump into the information. For those of you that have heard me talk about group policy, whether it be live, maybe at TechMen or TechEd, Ignite, maybe some of the other conferences that I've spoken at, you know that I have quite a passion for group policy. I've written 2 books on group policy, actually probably more than that, but it's something that I really think is very difficult and something that's very needed. And it's a shame when I find organizations and admins that don't use group policy. So what I want to do is I want to walk you through some areas in group policy to kind of get your mind running. I want to engage your mind. I want to put in your mind some things that I think are important that you need to take a look at. One of the things that I do as we go through presentations is I try to give everyone action items, things that I feel you should be doing immediately after you hear about some of these things. I'm going to give you some of those as we go through. So this should be a fun little tour as we go through group policy. And what I want to do is I want to hit a variety of different things with relation to group policy, but not only a variety of things that I think every administrator should absolutely engage with regard to group policy. So first of all, let's hit the first point. The first myth is group policy is not that hard. Well, I completely disagree. It took me many years to get really good at group policy. And I think it only took me a couple of years because I was a system policy guy back in Windows and T. And really, I just had to learn the differences between system policy and group policy, which for those of you that go back to Windows NT and system policy know there are quite a few differences. There are some similarities, but there are certainly some differences. Now, the first complexity I think with group policy is there's over 1,500 here. I'm going to come over here to my live environment, and we're going to jump into group policy. I'm just going to open up a GPO. So let's go in and let's open up the default domain policy. And we're going to edit this thing. And when I talk about the breadth of settings, I mean, if we just go into the administrative templates and look at all settings, I mean, look at the vast number of settings here. I mean, this is volume of settings that we're having to deal with. Now, this is only for computer configuration. If we come down here under administrative templates, all settings, you'll see that we have a similar list, a completely different list. None of these settings actually overlap with user settings. So that's why when we start talking about the complexity of group policy just in the vast number of settings, this is really what we're talking about. But we also have some services that I think really make it difficult to troubleshoot group policy. Now, some of you are aware of troubleshooting steps with group policy, and some of you struggle with it a little bit. So let's kind of go over some of the different services that are available that really group policy relies on. Now, first of all, we have the group policy service. Now, what's interesting about this is back in Windows 2000, we didn't have a group policy service. It actually ran on the net logon service. And that was a problem because now it was dependent. And so now it became this dependency, and Microsoft broke it away, and they separated it out and gave it its own service. We also have the DHCP desktops or servers, heck, even domain controllers. So the DHCP client is important because without DNS, group policy won't apply. Let me say that again. Without DNS, group policy won't apply. Now, your machines will actually authenticate at some point. It'll take longer. But because you're not going through DNS and you're not getting any information about the SRV records, you actually won't get group policy to apply. So that's something to keep in mind as you go through troubleshooting group policy in terms of trying to figure out if it should be applying, if it did apply, and where it's breaking. Also on the domain controller, if we move there, obviously we need Active Directory. And then we have replication. So we have DFSR as well as NTFRS, the file replication service. And of course, your domain controllers typically, because they're AD integrated, have DNS. They don't have to be, but that's typically the way it works. And then, of course, you have Kerberos, the KDC. Now, Kerberos and the KDC, the key distribution, or Kerberos Distribution Center, this is important because this is part of that aspect of DNS, which can actually break group policy from applying. So all of these things are integral. If we go back up on the list, one domain controller, we need to make sure that that change is replicated to all the domain controllers so that no matter which domain controller you're authenticating with, as you go through sysvol, you make sure that you get those settings applied to you. And then, of course, because we have DHCP, the scopes have to be correct and everything has to be configured correctly in there. So these are some of the different things that you may want to look at as you're going through group policy troubleshooting it if you happen to have any particular issues. I will be honest, in this list, the top two things that break is replication and DNS. DNS is either going to have the wrong information, it isn't available, you have stale records, or replication for some crazy reason, who knows why, is failing to replicate. But those are probably the two on the list that are most important. Now, another thing that makes group policy complicated, in my opinion, is something called scope. Is the idea that the user and or the computer, the two objects that receive group policy, have to be under scope of management. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean by scope of management for those of you who haven't heard this term or really don't know much about what this term means. Now, I'm going to come in here to Active Directory for users and computers to give you kind of a foundation, and then we'll move into group policy. So here, let's say that I have, takes a second to open this up. So let's say that I have my HROU, and you'll see that I have my list of users here. Well, you'll also notice that I have a user called Adam under IT. Now, if I go into group policy, this is the group policy management console, Adam, who's under IT, will never see that setting because Adam isn't under scope of management of the GPO that I link to HR. Make sense? Okay. So there's other things related to that as well, right? So I have to be in the correct OU, right? I can disable or enable the GPO or actually a setting in the group policy as well. Some settings individually can be enabled or disabled. I can enforce a GPO, which the whole concept of enforcement and block inheritance can really mess with how group policy applies. Now, let me show you where those are inside of the GPMC. Much of this is just a review for you, but it's important to go through this. So if I right-click on a GPO, I can enforce it. Now, let me show you what happens here. If I come down to, let's say, HR, and I go to the group policy objects that are applying. So the following, let's see, let's go into scope, let's go to HR, here we go. So here you'll see that I have group policy inheritance. You'll see that I'm getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 GPOs. Now, I'm getting all of these from the domain node. Now, let's actually maybe pick one that has another one. At finance, and then it has the 5 from the domain. If I come here to finance and I right click, I can block inheritance, and you'll notice that all the GPOs from the domain go away because they're blocked. But if I come back up here and I actually enforce one, you will see that here under domain policy, which was below the finance GPO, now has the highest precedence. This actually says precedence here. And you'll see that now the GPOs at the OU actually don't have the highest precedence anymore. Now, it is my recommendation that you stay away from this block inheritance and the enforcement because it gets really complicated. Even though you have this list, now when you start dealing with the settings inside of the GPOs as you're trying to get them to apply, really become complicated. Now, one more area that it complicates it even more is security filtering. I've only seen a couple of companies over the years, right? We're talking 17 years, that I feel have needed to do security filtering, or just a couple. Now, security filtering is the idea if I go into a GPO, I can actually modify who receives the setting. Now, those of you that have done this, I don't think it's a good practice. I think it causes complications, not only with the application of policy, but also troubleshooting. You'll notice that by default, everyone, every object, every user and computer receives the settings. And that's the way it should be. The design of the OUs and Active Directory should actually target who actually gets it, the policy settings. But this is just another way to modify scope of management. You'll also see that we have WMI filters. Filters do have their place. Probably one of the most useful areas of WMI filtering is for operating system and service pack versions. So you can actually target which computers get which settings in the GPO. And then finally, you have something called item level targeting and group policy preferences. That's what the GPP stands for. Now, again, for those of you that know group policy, this is a review for you. But if we go into a group policy preference, let's just maybe pick a shortcut, create a new shortcut. So this is going to be test. It's going to be a URL. We're going to put it on the desktop, www.test.com. And then over here under common, got to give it a valid name, test, common, you have item level targeting. Now, those of you who haven't seen this, this is pretty astounding, okay? When you go into any group policy preference and you go to targeting, you have the ability to define which settings on that machine you're going to evaluate to determine if policies should apply. Really awesome stuff. Now, let me give you some history on this. Microsoft actually didn't create group policy preferences. A company called Desktop Standard did back in the early 2000s. And in 2006, Microsoft bought this technology from Desktop Standard, and they put it inside of group policy. So I used to work for Desktop Standard, so these are some pretty awesome things. If you have any questions about how to use these, and I'm not trying to get more, but there are some amazing examples inside of that book that I told you about of how to actually utilize some of these targeting. This is some pretty awesome stuff. So again, that's just another way to modify scope of management. So you can see there's a variety of things that can really mess with normal group policy applying. But beyond that, even getting more difficult, in my opinion, is the structure of group policy. With group policy, you have so many moving parts. Now, when I create a group policy object, it actually splits the GPO into two parts. You have one part called the GPT, the group policy template. You have another part called the GPC, the group policy container. Now, the easy way to actually look at this is let's go back into group policy management here. And I'm going to come over here to the default domain policy just to give you an idea of how to do this. Now, if I go to my details, you will notice that the default domain policy starts with 31B for the GUID, the unique identifier. So now if we go look at the GP here on your domain controller under Windows, sysvol, domain name, so whatever the domain name is, policies, and then if you come down here, this is 31B. This is the GPT. So the GPT, the group policy template, actually stores your settings. So you see in here that you have some different bits of information about the settings that are in here. So we obviously have some machine settings. So these are some of the registry settings that you have in the GPT. Now, the group policy object also has another component, which is called the GPC, which is the group policy container. Now, the group policy container, you come into Active Directory users and computers, you go to System, you go to Policies, and then you'll see here there's the 31B again. Now, this actually doesn't have very many settings in it. You'll see here that most of these are actually empty. But if you has what I call the glue. It kind of points to all these different aspects of group policy, and that's how the group policy is controlled. So the GPT and the GPC are vital, and this is really where that confusing part of replication comes in, because I can be replicating the sysvol, but Active Directory doesn't replicate, so I only have half of the group policy object that's replicating, which causes obviously a huge problem, okay? So let's dive into some more complexities. Back in the olden days, right, before Windows Vista and Server 2008, you had ADM templates. So if I go into a group policy object, right, so actually edit a GPO, and I come under here to administrative templates, you will see that these administrative template settings, and I showed you this list earlier, these settings are coming from ADM type files. Well, before Windows 2008, Windows Server 2008, all of these were ADM templates, and there was just a handful of them. But now Microsoft has converted over ADMX and ADML files. Now, the ADMX and ADML files by default are Windows policy definitions. So now under policy definitions, you'll see ADMX, and then under each language, the L stands for language, you'll have ADML files. So what Microsoft did is they first of all wanted to make sure that administrative template settings specifically were vast languages. So you can have many different languages. So ADMX actually tells you where the registry path is in an XML format, and then each language actually modifies the GUI for whichever language is installed, giving that administrator the ability to have that. It's actually stored inside of the GPO. Now, back in the olden days, and something that you should probably look at, this is an action item, go look up cleaning up ADM templates from your GPOs, because many of you have upgraded over the years and you still have ADM templates inside of each GPO, meaning that if you come here to your folder structure, right, and you go to Windows, you go to your sysvol, double sysvol, you go to any of your policies and you open them up, you will actually see an ADM folder, and all of the ADMs are duplicates. You have 100 copies of the exact same ADM templates. Kind of a pain. Well, you'll notice that there are no ADMX files in here, because by default, what's happening is the group policy object, the GPO, gets the ADM templates, right, from the local machine. So you'll see that here. Notice here at the end of this, it says the ADMX file is received from the local machine. Now, this becomes a problem as well, because if you don't have the machine that you're using have the latest ADMX, you're not going to see the correct settings in the interface. So what I'm going to suggest, and this is an action item, and I have a nice little graphical here for you, is you want to create a central store. Now, this is the easy way. Actually, the graphic is more complicated than creating the central store. Here's how you create a central store. You go to your machine on the network, which is the latest and greatest. It has the latest settings, the latest service pack, all the hot fixes, everything. And on that machine, you go to Windows, and then you go to Policy Definitions, and you right-click and you copy the entire folder. Okay, remember, under Policy Definitions were ADMX and ADML. Then you go to your sysvol. This doesn't matter because it's going to replicate. a sysvol on one of your domain controllers. So you do not take this from a domain controller. You take this from the latest and greatest operating system with the latest service pack. And under policies, you simply paste. Now, what that does is over here, you will see that now when I edit the group policy object, edit, it gets my administrative templates from the central store. Notice it says central store now. This is how you get a central store. At this point, everyone will be using the same ADMX and ADML files because now they're on the domain controller in the policy definitions under policies. That's how you create a central store. So that's a nice little tip that you can. A little complex, a little bit more than you thought, huh? All right, now let's talk about the application of policy, because I still today, and I want to say last month when I was on my 32-day trip, I still get the same answer. When you want to do an update, okay, this is very important. Everyone's ears should be perking, okay? If you want to reapply policy, if you are doing this, I want you to stop, okay? I want you to stop. Because this is applying every setting again. You don't want to do that. You only want to apply the last settings. Now, if you do a force, you will see here, if we go here, reapplies all policy settings. Don't do this. Because now what you're doing is you're making the domain controller and your machine reapply all those settings. So you don't want to do that. All you want to do is a GP update. If you just do a GP update, and of course you can do this from the command prompt too, I'm sorry, just from the start run, you're just going to apply policy. The changes, that's the way policy works. You don't want to apply everything every single time. You only want to apply what you haven't applied. So this is what does this. Now, we could go into details in the registry where it stores information and knows what to do, blah, blah, blah. But your system knows what's been applied and what hasn't been applied. So what you want to do is make sure that you do a GP update. Now, a GP update doesn't always get you all the settings, okay? But nor does a force. Now, let's talk about foreground and background refresh. When you boot a machine, it is actually doing a processing of a foreground process first, and then it's going to do the background. So the process occurs when the machine starts up or user logs on. When you do a GP update, it performs a background refresh, meaning it's performing that in the background. Now, the issue with these background refreshes is that not everything applies. For example, folder redirection, group policy preference drive mappings, and printers. They don't apply. And the reason Microsoft did this is they didn't want to mess things up. They didn't want to break something that was currently running. So often when you do a GP update or a GP update force, you are going to see inside of the command that it wants to reboot. The reason it wants to reboot is because you have a setting in that policy which needs to have a foreground setting. It has to reapply when it boots up or when the user logs on. So that's what's happening in a foreground and background refresh. So a GP update gets you the changes. A GP update force gets you everything, change or not. But if there's a setting that has to apply in a foreground, well, gosh, you're going to have to recycle the machine. Okay? So that's what's happening when you get that particular message to show up when you're trying to do a GP update. You don't always have to reboot or relog on. It just depends on the settings that you have inside of the policy. All right? Now, another thing here. This one's an important one. Once I delete a setting in a GPO, it will remove it from the targeted computer. Not true. Not true at all. Okay? Now, we're going to get a little complicated here, but stay with me. All right? Now, what's happening here is they used to be blue dots and red dots. Now there's an arrow or no arrow. Okay? Let me show you what this looks like inside of the policy setting, because that's where you're going to be. If I go inside of a group policy object in the editor, okay, I'm just any GPO, doesn't matter. I go to Administrative Templates, All Settings, you will see here that there is no down arrow on these icons. For any of you that are running older operating systems, Microsoft changed these. They used to be a blue dot and red dot, okay? These would be equivalent to a blue dot, which will clean up. Every setting here will automatically clean up itself if it's deleted from the GPO. Now, let me show you what a down arrow or red dot policy looks like. If I come into a setting that does not clean up, it will look like this. See the little down arrow here? This used to be a red dot, and now it's a down arrow. Now, let me describe what's happening here. There are 4 locations in the registry, notice it right here, that clean up settings when you delete them from the policy. If your setting isn't in one of those 4 locations, it won't clean up. Not every setting can go in one of those 4 locations. You'll see here the hidden files, right? This is a setting that I have customized and I put inside of here. This controls whether I see hidden or super hidden files. If we actually go to that ADM template, so I'm going to come in here, go to my ADM template. I'm going to show you that right here is the registry path. There is no word policies. Notice it just says Software Microsoft Windows. This is not in one of the 4 locations that is a policies location. If, however, I go into Windows and I go to policy definitions and I open up a different file, you will see here that this one says Software Policies Microsoft. This is one of the 4 locations that has policies. This will clean up. So if you have GPOs that you think are going to clean up because you delete the setting from the group policy object, it may not do that. Also, let me tell you, okay, most of the settings that are located here under your Windows settings, security settings, do not clean up, okay? Some of these security settings do not clean up. Most of them do not. These are not registry settings. So if you delete it from in here, it may not delete it from your system. You have to test. But the list is pretty long here to test. So these are important aspects to keep track of with group policy when you're going through, okay? All right. More myths. I back up my GPOs, so I'm good. No. Now, backing up GPOs, extremely important. Let's talk about that, and let's talk about where you're not good. Now, with backup options, you can back up using the GPMC. You can back up using PowerShell. There's also some VB scripts. And you can back up using third-party tools like Recovery Manager Plus, okay? Now, let's talk about the GPMC. Inside of the GPMC, when I perform a backup, let's go to the GPMC. When I perform a backup of all the GPOs, backup all, I'm actually backing up all the GPOs at that point in time. Excellent, right? If I make a change to a GPO and I don't back it up, I do not have that backup. I don't have that setting backed up. If I restore anything, it's not going to include those changes. So an action item, if you're not backing up GPOs once a day, go do it. Put it in a scheduled task. Run PowerShell. I don't care what you do. Back up your GPOs every single day. But you have to put them in a scheduled task because this doesn't do it. There is no scheduler here, right? This just says backup all. There's no scheduling of backups in the GPMC. But of course, that's why I'm talking about the other options. Now, this is great, all right? But now let's talk about from this point forward. That's the backup. Well, what about the restore, okay? GPMC can restore individual GPOs or all. PowerShell, individual or all. Recovery Manager can actually restore individual settings, individual GPOs, and all GPOs, okay? This is very important. For example, let's say that you have multiple settings in a GPO, which of course you do. And let's say that you go into a GPO, you make one setting that you want to keep, and you make another setting that you don't want to keep, and you want to recover from that. Well, when you restore a GPO, you're not going to have the correct setting because you restored to an older version, but you wanted that. So you do not have individual setting, right? Individual configuration restorability. So if I go into any GPO and I make a change to that group policy object, I don't care where it is. If I make a change to this and I want to restore that setting only, I cannot do that using Microsoft tools. It does not exist, all right? Now, recovery is something that Microsoft doesn't do either, okay? I can restore, right? Let me show you again. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to go to my Manage Backups. I can pick on a GPO, and I can restore it. This is what I'm saying about restore, okay? I cannot recover using Microsoft tools. Now, when I say using Microsoft tools, I'm talking about the basic tools, the things that come with it. Microsoft has a tool called Advanced Group Policy Management, AGPM. This tool can actually do a recovery, but you have to get that through other means, right? So Recovery Manager is a much better tool to do this, and it gives you granular restoration. Let me show you what I mean. So let's go into a group policy object. I'm going to come in here to the, I think it's this one I want to deal with, Chicago GPO. So I come into the Chicago GPO. I go down to a setting. So I'm going to come in here to my security settings. And you'll notice here that the guest account status is disabled. Now here, for some reason, someone enables this. Uh-oh, it's now enabled. How do I recover from this? Now, if, for example, I make another setting, limit local account blank password, right? So I can't do this. So this is one that I want, and this is one that I don't want. I have two settings now. If I restore using the GPMC, I'm going to lose this setting. I'm going to get this setting back, but I want to keep this setting. This is what I'm talking about. I want to recover. I don't want to restore. Well, with the right tools, this is actually pretty easy to do. So if we go look at a tool like Recovery Manager allows me to look at the changes that occur in group policy. Now, Recovery Manager is like any other tool. You can schedule it. It actually has a scheduler built into it to where it is scheduled to run every single day. But I can also back up now. So let's say you get to work, it's 8 o'clock, you make some changes, you're like, oh gosh, I didn't want to make those changes. Well, this is where Recovery Manager comes in. You can do a backup now. It'll go get those changes. And now inside of the tool, you can see the changes that are occurring, okay? But I can go to granular level. I can simply type the name of my GPO, and then I can go in and say, oh gosh, I want to put the setting back to what it was, right? So I can come in here and I can say the backup value for guest is disabled and the current value is enabled. I don't want to mess with the other setting. So now I do a granular level restore. And when I go back to the group policy object, let's go to the GPMC, let's do a refresh. And now when I go back in, you got to love live demos, right? Now when I go back in, I have this enabled and this disabled. So I didn't destroy what I created. Now, those of you that are group policy administrators, I'm assuming most of you on this webinar are, this is valuable stuff. I mean, this is vital. You have to have this level, because what if I changed 100 settings and only one of them has to be recovered? You're telling me that you want to restore and lose 99 settings? No, you don't want to do that. You want a tool. You need a tool which is going to allow you to see the Recovery Manager does, and it does it. I mean, you saw how quick it was, seamless, powerful. Okay. All right. Let's talk about our fifth myth. I don't need to be notified of GPO changes. Great. So let's say you hire a new administrator. The administrator is poking around in group policy. The administrator goes into GPO, a GPO. You probably have many of them, right? Just pick one. And they go in, they edit, they're poking around, and they come in here and they're like, okay, I'm just wondering if they have that setting made. Yeah, it's this one here. And they accidentally hit a button and they hit okay. Well, they don't remember which one it is. Or someone goes in and maliciously does something. You're telling me that you don't want to know when a single change occurs in group policy? I completely disagree with you. You must, as Active Directory and group policy administrators, know when things change. And GPMC doesn't exist. With PowerShell, you're going to have to pull it from the event logs. Event Viewer, all you have is event ID level. But watch this. Every change that I just made in group policy, watch this. This is awesome. I actually have alerts telling me that those changes occurred. Look at that. Every single change that I've made is right here. If you want to know the details, you come to Reports, you come down here to Group Policy Management, and you look at recently modified GPOs, and there they all are. Look at these details. So I have alerts set up, and I can get reports. I can also go in and look at advanced GPO reports. I can go to security settings, and I can actually look at the details of what changed. Awesome, isn't it? Absolutely awesome. I am telling you, a tool like AD Plus in combination with Recovery Manager is a must for group policy management. Without these tools, you're telling me that this tool, Active Directory Users and Computers, is going to help you? No. You're telling me that this tool, the GPMC, is going to help you? No. You don't even have a report capability in here to find out what changed. There's nothing. And if you think that you're going to be able to use Event Viewer, right, to get those changes, they show up in the security log. But look, they're not even here. I don't even see anything group policy. I mean, they get lost in the shuffle, okay? So this is where you really need to have tools that are going to help you know what's going on in group policy. Tool like AD Plus in combination with Recovery Manager, something similar to them so that you can actually recover from group policy issues. Because without them, I mean, you're really stuck with NTDS Util, the best that you have from Microsoft. Painful. You don't want to do that. You want a tool that's easy to recover. You want a tool that's going to tell you when things change, so if you need to recover, you know where to go. We've gone through a lot of information in this short 45 minutes, but hopefully it was very useful to you. I've given you some action items. Please go through those action items. If you do have any questions that weren't answered on this webinar and you still have questions, there's my email address. Send me some email questions. I'd love to get them and love to help you with your group policy issues. I know that in 2018, we're going to be producing more information on group policy. So if the information we provided today was useful to you, I guarantee what we're going to provide in 2018 is even more and in more depth. So I really hope you enjoyed this. As a reminder, you should get an email in the next couple of days with a link to this webinar. Please take a look at that. If you have any questions, email us. I want to thank all of you for your attention. I want to thank everyone that helped me with the Q&A in the background. Hopefully you got all your questions answered. Email me. Email the events team. I'm going to let you get back to work. I hope you have a great rest of your day. If I don't talk to you between now and 2018, have a great. Until next time I see you live or I'm on a webinar with you, this is Derek Melber for the rest of the AD Solutions team. Thank you very much and have a good rest of your day.